Before I introduce our panel, I just want to introduce some very special person. Michael Schiffer. He is my co-producer and the writer and director of this film. And for those of you who don't know his background, he is an experienced filmmaker with many important movies under his belt, including Colors, Lean on Me, and Crimson Tide. And I'm so fortunate that he's my boyfriend and he agreed to do this. So we're not going to delay with a lot of long introductions. I'm sure all of these men are well known to you, and their bios are in your packets. So we've kind of agreed to a format to keep this rolling, and so that we will also have time for questions at the end. So let me just at least acknowledge the members of the panel. We have Mark Killian, who is currently the director of the Arizona Department of Agriculture. He's the closest that we have to a politician on the panel. He's a recovering politician. We have next to him Ron Rayner, who is a third-generation farmer and also on the board of directors of the Family Farm Alliance. And then finally we have John Sullivan, who is the retired Deputy General Manager of Salt River Project. All right, so let's get going here. Ron, I'm going to ask the first question of you. As the film points out, you've been farming in Goodyear, Arizona for near on 50 years, over 50 years. And so you've been subject to the Groundwater Management Act now for over 35 years. What do you think are the biggest benefits of the Act, and conversely, what do you think are its biggest drawbacks?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Probably more drawbacks I can think of. But, really, you have to think of the context when the Groundwater Management Act was being developed. You saw how long that took in that film, and I had forgotten even, just how much back and forth, how many meetings went on, the great length of time. And if you can imagine, you're a water user, you're a property owner, you're sitting out there trying to get as much information as you can about what the heck are they talking about? What is going on? I mean, and I want you to know that there was a real feeling of trepidation and absolute fear. Were you going to have enough water to farm with when this was over? What was it going to do to the value of your land? Was your banker going to loan you any money because you were using that farm as collateral for a loan? I mean, there were all of these things that were running through farmers' minds while this was going on, and I will tell you, it was very fearful. But in retrospect now, with the benefit of at least 35 years, and maybe my memory is just getting worse, but you look at it now and you think, the most positive thing about the Act is, that I guess it's validated agriculture's use of water. So inside at least the active management areas, we have the recognition that we have an irrigation grandfathered right. So it doesn't mean there's going to be water under your pump, but at least if there is, you have the right to pump it. And that supply, hopefully, is the main other benefit from having the Act, in that you were assigned a groundwater duty. Every farm in the active management areas, you were assigned a groundwater duty. That's just the volume of water that you are allowed to use on that land. It's kind of an interesting thing, because that ties into one of the least favorite things about the Groundwater Management Act, and that's filling out those blankety blank forms at the end of every year, and then writing the check for the groundwater withdrawal fees, the pump tax. I just did that last week, so it's fresh in my mind. That check was for over $13,000 for that one farm. That's not really a very big one. you know, when I added it up over the 35 years, and, you know, I've paid something over $400,000 to the state of Arizona, the Department of Water Resources. You wonder, well, what the heck did they do with that money? Well, interesting, in the act, there's some direction. They're supposed to use at least out of that $3 or $3.25 fee, at least $2.50 of it is supposed to go into a fund for purchasing water, for water banking, and basically replenishment. Boy, that sounded, you know, like maybe that was a reasonable thing to do if I had to pay. Frankly, I never understood whether, was that supposed to be just punishment for pumping water, or did it really serve a purpose? But those funds that were collected, you know, there were a lot of times when there wasn't enough water to buy to be able to put back in the ground. And so there was kind of a surplus of cash sitting around. So guess what the legislature did for 2 years in a row during the recent recession? They found there's several $1 million sitting in these bank accounts at the Phoenix AMA, and the legislature just swept it all, even though it said right in the law that the money that I wrote the check for was supposed to go to make the water supply better, that I was helping fund the replenishment of that, and that money went away. Anyways, the calculation of the pumpage is the easiest part of the whole reporting, filling out the form. The really difficult part is figuring out what the heck you did with that water after you got it up, because every piece of property that had a different ownership at some time or other, it has its own individual grandfathered right. And so you've got this little, I don't know, 6 or 8 digit number that attaches to every one of them. Then you have to figure out where every bit of that water went, not just from what you pumped out of your well, but whatever you got from an irrigation district, whatever you gathered in tailwater from somebody else. You've got to apply it to each one of those rights. And guess what? If you overused it, then the only way you can fix that is to go out and buy some flex account credits from somebody else to bring your numbers in balance. So it's a difficult thing to do, filling out the reports. Maybe we can, under the governor's initiative to decrease red tape, maybe we can figure out what's really needed out of that whole thing, and maybe sorting all those numbers really doesn't need to be done. As a matter of fact, a few years ago, we did create, sat on a committee that helped write up the agricultural best management practices rule to allow people to consolidate a lot of those rights and not have to shuffle the water duties quite as much. But
so I think that points out, though, the fact that there has been changes to the Groundwater Management Act, and that I need to point out, too, that agriculture isn't the only entity that pays that withdrawal fee. Every person that pumps groundwater in an active management area, unless you're pumping from an exempt well, pays that fee. So let's move on to second question for Mark Killian. You have had 14 years, you had 14 years in the Arizona House of Representatives, including in key leadership positions. And you served during a time when there were other initiatives, water initiatives, that the legislature considered and passed. Would you talk a little bit about those efforts and what was necessary to achieve success?
You bet, I'd be happy to. I'm not used to having Kathy question me. I'm used to questioning her, so this is a little different. She always answered my questions, so that was good.
Tried.
You know, I think after the Groundwater Management Act, I showed up on the scene 2 years after it was done, and I think everyone was kind of trying to take a deep breath because it was such a big deal to get done. But if you'll remember, sometime in 83, 84, there were some problems with some pesticides being sprayed in the Scottsdale area. One of the aerial sprayers dive bombed one of those communities over there. And you'll remember a picture of Governor Babbitt walking through the cotton field with a gas mask on. And that didn't get the agricultural community too excited. But it led to discussions about how do we protect our groundwater. After we had gone through the effort to accumulate the groundwater and do protections as far as its use, how do we protect its quality? And so in '84, there was an effort began, and it was a nonpartisan effort, to figure out how we protect the quality of our groundwater. And there was a lot of discussions that went into that. A lot of people were involved in those discussions. It took many months. In the House, Larry Hawk led the discussions in the House, and I don't remember who on the Senate side was involved in that. But we hammered that out, and that became probably one of the first efforts in the United States where we attacked and preserved the quality of our water from pollutants. It was really a model act for the rest of the United States. And so when you take the Groundwater Management Act, the Groundwater Quality Act, that pretty much set the boundaries in which we would have good water, a source of water, plenty of water to do the things that we needed to do. Then a few years later, Nevada and California began to start talking about taking Arizona's share of the Colorado River water from the CAP because we weren't using it. So I was serving as the Speaker of the House at the time, and Rita McGuire came to my office one day and she said, "Mark, we gotta get a big stick and beat Nevada up in California." And they came up with the idea of the groundwater banking idea, and so we ran a bill, we sponsored that, so we could take our full allocation of the CAP. When we did that, that brought California and Nevada to their knees. They never expected us to use all that water. And by banking that water and using our full allocation, it began the process of California and Nevada coming to a realization that they had to deal with their problems. That helped us a great deal. We saw water levels in some of our areas begin to rise. It was a visionary piece of legislation, and if you take all three of those together, Arizona planted a flag in the ground to the rest of the country that said, we know how to take care of water, we know how to manage it, we know how to protect it, and we know how to best use it. So California and Nevada, get your act together and do something. And I think I was quoted in one of the Nevada papers as suggesting that Nevada, well, I won't tell you what I said, but anyway, the bottom line is by working together, and by the way, it wasn't a partisan issue. Water's not a partisan issue. It's a nonpartisan, and we are blessed with leaders who are willing to work together for the good of all, and that's what we did. And I think to a degree it sets the stage for going forward today and solving other problems that we have with water.
Thank you. And thanks for your efforts on those really important pieces of legislation. They have been monumental. John, so you spent, I think, a little over 45 years, am I right, with the Salt River Project, retiring as the Deputy General Manager. Can you describe the impact that the Groundwater Management Act has had on groundwater in the Phoenix AMA and in general?
45 years and 10 days to be specific.
Who's counting, huh?
But who's counting? Just so you all know, it took a great deal of effort to not wear my Birkenstocks and cargo shorts today. This is not my normal dress. In terms of the impact that the Groundwater Management Act and the related acts that came along later have had in the Phoenix active management area, I think in general you can say that less groundwater is being used per capita and per acre within the Phoenix active management area. That is resulted in a more robust drought protection for the Phoenix metropolitan area. If you go all the way from the Superstition Mountains to all past Gila Bend, there's more groundwater available for those very, very dry periods that we experience. The reliability of supply is better. The efficiency of supply is better because the depth of groundwater has come back up within the Phoenix area. And we now recognize the importance in the Phoenix area of reliance on renewable supplies. And so the Central Arizona Project and SRP surface water supplies play an important role in terms of co-managing surface water and groundwater for the Phoenix Active Management Area. To give you a snapshot, a perspective of the impact of the Groundwater Management Act, if you look at depth to groundwater on the average for the eastern subbasin in the Phoenix metropolitan area, so just the East Valley, depth of groundwater at in the early 1940s on the average, that included wells right next to the river and then wells all the way down in Gilbert and Chandler. But if you look on the average, depth of groundwater was about 100 feet. 1950s, 200 feet. 1960s, 250 feet. 1970s, over 250 feet. The Groundwater Management Act passes in 1980, and by the end of the 1980s, we began to see recovery of the groundwater levels to just around 200 feet. And in 2014, groundwater levels had risen to just under 150 feet average. So it's very, very graphic. There was an improvement. It continues to be an improvement. That's being driven by several things. It's being driven by conservation, both in the agricultural community, but also in the municipal areas and industrial areas. It's being driven by water banking. That's why the Water Banking Act was so important, because we were in a period in the late 80s, early 90s, early 2000s, where Arizona had more Central Arizona Project supply than they had demand, and it provided the vehicle for doing something with that. For agriculture, since this is a conference that's focused on agriculture, improved efficiency has been the byword for agriculture. Farmers were much more involved in lining ditches that may have been unlined at the time, laser leveling their fields so that the water would more efficiently be used in growing crops. Also measurement, although the reporting side of it was a bit of a pain in the rear end. The actual measurement of water allowed you to measure progress. And before that, before the 1980s, there weren't a lot of meters on wells. And so that was important. And then, as Ron mentioned, best management practices, which was something that came to pass in the 1990s, has continued to encourage agricultural enterprises to be very efficient in their water use. Lastly, stewardship. Agriculture has been an important player in using reclaimed water. So taking water that has been used once before and reusing that to grow crops. And then, as I mentioned, water banking. Groundwater savings facilities were really an important thing where agriculture would reduce its pumping and allow for storage of Colorado River water by using it for irrigation. In the Salt River Project alone, since groundwater savings facilities were allowed up until 2016, over 800,000 acre-feet of water has been stored within the district boundaries. And that story can be told in Pinal County, can be told in the West Valley, can be told in the Far East Valley. And so groundwater savings facilities has been an important tool not only for agriculture but also for the municipalities and for CAP.
Thank you. So we're going to do another really quick round of questions, and we're going to open it up to the audience because we would really like to answer your questions. Ron, you've won numerous awards for your farming innovations and environmental stewardship. Would you talk about the need for leadership in agricultural research and innovation?
You know, it's a little bit hard to think about it when you're in the thick middle of growing a crop or whatever, and you're just trying to make everything come together. But when you have the opportunity to have a little retrospect and looking back at this thing, I'm surprised, frankly, you know, how much agriculture in general has reduced their water use. I was surprised on our own farm, and it was because of all of the data that I've gathered over the years inadvertently because from these reports. But we were using more water on the same acreage from the same wells several years ago, and I did some brief calculations, and we're actually producing almost twice as much. It's not crop by crop, but overall, nearly twice as much off of less water, which was astounding to me. And, you know, and that's just on our farm, and it was almost incidental because virtually every farmer, every time you go out there and you plant a crop or whatever, you try to innovate and do everything you can to, one, use less water, because for one thing, it costs you, it hits you right in the pocketbook, so you don't want to spend a nickel more than you have to. I have a hard time explaining that to my friends sometimes, but when, you know, there's somebody selling your fertilizer and you just beat on the guy to get $1 a ton off of the price on it, they don't understand that when water is an input that can cost you $150 an acre, that by tweaking it this way and that way, you can get that number down a few bucks. It happens, believe me. It's enough of an incentive every day for you to manage that very, very carefully. And I also learned that we don't know all there is to know about farming in this desert, because we've had a couple of paradoxical things come up just with some new things that we're trying with no-till planting of crops, leaving a lot of residue on the ground, figuring out ways to do that and make it happen. We're cooling the ground. In the summertime, it's kind of cooling it. There's a guy right down here in the front that first measured that for me, Paul. Thank you. But then it starts raising questions. Well, you know, if that is a way to reduce the evapotranspiration rate of a crop, maybe we ought to tinker with that a little bit more. Anyway, there's room to do more, that's for sure.
Thank you. And you know, when we were at your farm, you showed us around, and it was for me, it was remarkable. I loved that experience, and I really thank you for that. Mark, you've expressed the need to recognize the role that Arizona agriculture plays in meeting worldwide needs for food. Would you like to talk about that a little?
Sure, I'd be happy to. This $17 billion industry that employs 80,000 people has a huge reach beyond the farm gate when you look at the economy and how that dollar flows. But putting the economics aside for just a second and looking at the moral mandate of feeding the world, I think Arizona, as we talk about water use and policy, needs to come to grips with some very serious issues. As world population continues to grow, and they tell us by 2050 there'll be nearly 10 billion people in the world, agriculture's demand to produce food is going to double with the same amount of inputs, the same amount of land. And in order to meet that need, we need to preserve our ability to produce that food. Arizona is blessed with some of the best climate, the best land, water, resources in order to do that. And why we would do anything to reduce our ability to meet that demand is beyond me. Now, you can't eat cell phones, you can't eat computer chips, can't eat computers. Everybody in this room needs food. Everybody around this world needs food. Arizona happens to grow some of the best crops in the world right here. So anything that would diminish our ability to meet that moral obligation to feed the world, to me, needs serious discussion. When you think about the countries in the world that are having the most unrest, the countries that are struggling the most, that struggle with liberty and freedom, they are the countries that can't feed themselves. They're totally dependent on other countries for their survival. They don't care about freedom of speech. They don't care about freedom of religion. They don't care about any of the freedoms that we have. Their bellies are empty, their kids are starving, and they'll do anything to get their hands on food. Contrast that to where we are here in America. Any grocery store you go into today has 40,000 different products. The American family spends 10% of their budget on food. If you lived in Europe, you'd spend 25% of your budget on food. Now I want to ask you this question. If the forces in America today that want to diminish agriculture are successful, and your budget has changed such that you go from spending 10% of your budget on food to 25%, that 15% increase, what are you not going to be able to do? If you go back through America's history, the reason the great middle class was able to expand the way it was in the last century was because the typical American family did not have to go out in the backyard and milk a cow or have a garden. They could spend their time earning a living and spend their time doing fun things, which fueled the American economy. The advances in agriculture and the things that the universities did in research to help agriculture improve fueled the great growth in the American middle class. The American public today has forgotten that. So my plea to all of you and anyone that's involved in water discussions in Arizona today on what we're going to do with water, let us not forget that the reason America is free and so prosperous is because we can feed ourselves. And we can't forget that.
Interesting. John, we recently learned that Maricopa County was the fastest growing county in the United States in 2016. So, looking forward, what are the opportunities for meeting increasing demands for water, both for municipal use and in the and will agriculture be impacted?
So first, agriculture will remain a major industry in the state of Arizona. The value of Arizona crops continues to grow, and the agriculture on tribal lands is becoming much more important to the economy of this state. And those two factors makes agriculture an important player in terms of future water use within the state of Arizona. Central Arizona, as Kathy mentioned, continues to be well positioned for growth. Some of us would argue maybe a little too well positioned for growth. Central Arizona is a wonderful place to live. And so people keep moving to Arizona. I will talk a little bit about municipal use, and that is Arizona cities that are within active management areas have done a good job of putting conservation ordinances in place to reduce and to make more efficient use of water. They've also put in place stringent conservation rules for drought periods. The natural occurrence of urbanization of ag lands has played a role in terms of the ability to serve increasing urban needs. And most of the municipalities have put together very robust water resource plans. And that takes care of present needs, but it also takes care of needs looking out 10, 20, 30 years. The big issue is, what do we do next? And so there's a need for continued collaboration and leadership to define water resource needs, to make sure that we have a viable and productive agricultural economy in the state. There are some things that need to get done. And Kathy, would you please report back to Senator Kyle that I said this? We need to get the stream adjudications completed in the state of Arizona. There is too much uncertainty in rural Arizona. This is particularly true for rural Arizona. Too much uncertainty of supply, and that needs to just be dealt with. Secondly, we need to have strategies for future supplies and future conservation for the state of Arizona. So the Governor Ducey recognized this. It was actually a thought that I think Governor Brewer had, but the commission, the council was put together by Governor Ducey, Governor's Water Augmentation Council. It has similar looks to the commission that was put together back in the 1970s. It's way too large, very difficult to get things done when you have 60, 70 people in the room.
In public.
But they are talking about water augmentation, water conservation reuse, and infrastructure requirements. There have been some innovative partnerships that have arisen over the last few years. One that I was personally involved in was the partnership between SRP and the Gila River Indian community to create a unique organization, a limited liability corporation called GROWS, the Gila River Water Storage LLC, which is providing opportunities for not only storage of water, but also for providing long-term supplies to communities and industry for future growth. The recent activities of some of the water districts in cooperating with the Central Arizona Project to conserve water in Lake Mead is another example of collaboration. And I'm sure there will be many, many more. So I think based on the film, there are some takeaways this morning that we need to think about. Good things in water require attention. They take effort and perseverance. So other than Kathy, nobody walked away from the table.
I came back.
And it takes time. This state started talking about its overdraft of groundwater in the 1940s. And they talked themselves through the 1950s, the 1960s, into the 1970s. It took time to get to the point where a solution came out. And so don't despair that there's not enough activity and solutions. Work is being done, and as the tension becomes greater, the opportunities for solution will be better. So the bottom line for you all this morning is there's lots of opportunity for leadership in the water community in this state.
Amen. I don't know whether we have time for one question. Sorry. But But these were great remarks, absolutely great remarks. Does anybody have like just the best question that you would like to ask?
Put the pressure on.
I can't believe it. Not one question of this esteemed panel. We have a question in the back. I think you have to come up to the microphone. I'm really sorry.
If you were able to get back all the water that was swept and taken back into the general fund from the Arizona Water Protection Fund and from the Banking Authority, what would you do with it?
Give it to the Department of Agriculture.
Well, actually, it wasn't the water that was swept, it was the money. The water's still there underground, but because the money was swept, they haven't been able to acquire as much water to store underground.
Actually, from what I recall was that, some of that money was collected when there was water available, but it was actually the lack of facilities, either in lieu recharge or direct recharge in the Phoenix AMA to accomplish that recharge. There was simply a lack of facilities to do that massive program.
One of the challenges we face in agriculture is the disparity in price that we pay across irrigation districts and across the AMA. In some parts of Maricopa County, you're paying $26, $27 an acre foot. If you go down to Pinal County, you will be paying as much as $70 an acre foot for water. And so I could see where that money could be used in an effort to come up with some sort of policy or event that somewhat equalizes the cost of water so that you don't drive farmers out of business because you make it almost impossible for them to farm at the current rates that they're being charged. And then that can get into a whole bunch of discussions. I know, Sharon, you want me to shut up, but we could talk about what's going on with power and clean coal and natural gas and all those issues. But the bottom line is when you make water so expensive that you can't farm, you can't grow anything, then you fall into that trap of what's more important. Do I take my taxpayers and buy more tanks and missiles? Or do I take my taxpayer dollars and put it into farming, which feeds me? To me, as a conservative Republican, sorry I said that, that's an easy choice. I'd rather be able to feed myself than build another missile.
Well, I don't think I disagree. So, thank you. I want you to thank this great panel. Thank you very much.